such a kind of terrible, shocking story. An 80-year-old granddad
walking his dog,
attacked. 5 children initially arrested, but...
One remains in custody, a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know, obviously, the circumstances of this attack, but we do know that the police have referred themselves because of previous contact with the victim regarding complaints about antisocial behaviour. Now, I can imagine there will be viewers watching this programme saying, because whenever we discuss antisocial behaviour, people get in touch to describe their own circumstances, their own instances of when they've spoken to police and feel like it's not taken seriously. And quite often the question is, how bad does it have to get before police take it seriously? And in this case, as I say, we don't know what the connection is, but for the police to refer themselves, something serious.
And he complained about stones being thrown at him, at his house, being spat at, being shouted at by young people. An old man. He's an old man. He's someone's someone's grandpa.
Nobody should feel under siege in their home or afraid to go out of their front door. It should be the right of us all to be able to go out and just live our lives and not be terrified.
And he was just seconds from his home. That's where the attack took place. And his poor daughter finding him. It's a shocking story. It's a tale about modern. Is this a tale of modern Britain?
We're hemmed in by legal restrictions.
Yes,
of course, because of where this is inevitably going to go. But you've got to think. Right, there's the role of the police. What about the parents of the families of those kids who are alleged to have been given them such a terrible time and behaving the way that they did? What were the other interventions? We'll find out if there were any by the local authority, social workers. We'll find out down the line. But it breaks your heart, and it's just so dispiriting that this can happen.
We were sort of to have a great respect for the elderly.
Well,
give them a bus, give up your seat on the bus, go to their assistance. Respect the elderly.
At this stage,
there's something shocking about this.
I just want to say at this stage, no connections being made about the individual in custody and the antisocial behaviour. But the point is that this was a man, an elderly man, who had made complaints about antisocial behaviour.
He's been let down.
Yeah, exactly.
His family has been let down.
He failed.
Failed completely.
Unquestionably, there was now a corpse. There was an 80-year-old man walking his dog, and now he is dead. Something has gone really, really wrong.
But there was something different about this, though, isn't there? We know there were 1 million antisocial behaviour incidents in the year to... last September, the latest figures. We know that lots of people experience this. We know there's lots of frustration that we've reported and action has not been taken. But normally, when you talk about antisocial behaviour, if you're a member of Parliament dealing with persistent antisocial behaviour, it's normally about people making noise or throwing stones or jostling in the street. And at the worst end, somebody being robbed. But for somebody to be attacked and killed, I mean, that is rare and materially different and horrible. And you wonder, there has to be something else here. We'll find out. But to kill somebody, I mean, it's so extreme. It's not in the normal realm of antisocial behaviour.
No, a frail old man.
Well, it's whether there was an intention to kill, but some of the details are very distressing. Some of the reports from his family members on how he died, and I think there's an element of respect. I mean, you're absolutely right, but how do we get that respect back? How do we stop this happening? Because yes, it's very rare for somebody to get killed, but there will be people watching now who will either themselves or know family members, neighbours, who will be frightened to go out of their houses and down the street, go to the shops or wherever, because they feel that other people are going to intimidate them and abuse them, and that's wrong. And somehow we got to get it back. That there is this respect, and people are not subjected to this terrible behaviour.
The senior investigating officer said the circumstance is extremely tragic and upsetting, not only for his family and friends, but also the wider community. We continue to offer support to the family.
He lives in a quiet cul-de-sac. The definition of contented suburbia. It's so shocking.
And Leicestershire Police say they made a voluntary referral which has now become a mandatory referral to the Police Conduct Authority. Right, let's talk about, goodness me, another tragedy, and this is what happened in the English Channel. A pregnant woman among the 12 people who died yesterday after this boat with dozens of migrants tore apart.
I think the bottom set just fell through from the bottom of it. So they all went straight down.
Look, massively overcrowded.
Massively overcrowded, because that's what they're doing now, putting more on the boats than ever.
No, they're maximising their profits. The people traffickers are...
And they didn't have have life jackets on.
They get the cheapest boats they can. They get as many people on. It'll be charging each one several thousands of pounds. I think of the 12 who drowned, a pregnant woman, I think 10 of them were female.
6 children.
6 of them children. The others who were rescued and survived, some of them are in very, very poor condition, and they could yet die themselves. But this is smashing the gangs, which is what Keir Starmer said is the right approach to that. But how do you do it? It's not that easy because there is so much money to be made, and people are desperate. We think these were from Eritrea. They're very desperate to come to Britain and start a new life.
But I think that part of the issue here is that it's not only the gangs wanting to make money, it's that there is now a shortage of boats, a shortage of the engines and the materials to make the boats work. And so therefore, if there's a shortage of boats, you end up putting far more people onto the boats than before. And if you look at the statistics which we were seeing earlier, the big rise this year compared to the last two years isn't the number of crossings, it's the number of people who are dying. And that's because they are crossing in more dangerous circumstances.
Yeah, and 21,000 people crossed this year. It's around where it was last year. It's still lower than 2022, which was the record year. I think 2018 was the first year.
In 2022, it was 16 deaths. In 2024, it's 42 deaths. So even though the crossings are higher in 2022 in 2022 at this point, the number of deaths was much lower. So it's becoming much, much more dangerous.
Yeah. And, new government came in, so we're going to smash the gangs, so better get on with it.
They better get on with it.
Because
and, of course, the first thing they did was scrap the Rwanda plan. Some Tories were saying to me yesterday in the House, maybe they should have tried it. At least tried it. But they scrapped it immediately because of the deterrent effect.
Yes.
Well, the deterrent effect didn't do very well last year and the year before.
Well, because we hadn't got a plane in the air.
But that was the problem with Rwanda.
If we got a plane in the air, it may have made a difference.
It was shouted all the time.
There's no deterrent at all now. There's no deterrent at all now.
If it was a magic answer, it didn't work. We spent a fortune and wasted...
They didn't try it.
Wasted a fortune on it.
Well, as they'd spent all that money, with Rwanda, why not put a plane in the air?
Wasted that money.
Right, let's just move on to another issue which gets people just as exercised and upset, and that is this ongoing row over winter fuel payments, which will no longer go to anyone other than those in receipt of pension credit.
The very poorest.
The very poorest. Now, I think people can understand that there are wealthy older people.
The king.
In fact, many wealthy older people would say, we don't need to claim this particular benefit. But the cut-off point is so low. Surely Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is going to have to think again.
Well, she's showing no sign of it whatsoever.
In fact, she seems to have doubled down. Rachel Reeves suggested pensioners can afford the government's cut to winter fuel payments because of increases in the state pension and also energy bills being lower than in previous years. This is what she said.
Well, the increases in the basic state pension mean that constituents of hers are £900 better off than they were a year ago. And, of course, energy bills are lower this year than they were last year. But it is important that we ensure that the 800,000 people who missed out on pension credit under the previous Conservative government now get access to that support, because those are the poorest pensioners.
Total silence on the Labour benches. There is no support for this.
It's madness. As I said, time after time after time, it's absolutely...
And if you want your pension credit, good luck with the 243 questions you have to complete.
And as Steve Webb, the former Lib Dem spokesperson who's a pensions expert, says, there are 1.6 million pensioners who are below the poverty line, who are losing the winter allowance. Of those, a half could be claiming pension credit and aren't. So get them to claim pension credit. The other 800,000, they don't qualify for pension credit, but they are still living in poverty.
Well, you can be on 220 quid a week and you've just lost up to 300 quid a year. just when energy bills are going up.
Oh, they're going up again.
She knows that it was what one Labour MP called it a suicidal standalone cut because it's betrayed so many people who voted Labour and thought they were going to get this retain something that wasn't an election issue because nobody ever thought it would be taken away.
It's the Winterfield Alliance survived 6 Conservative chancellors. 6.
Who'd have thought it would be a Labour chancellor who would get rid of it?
You know, the state...
Gordon Brown's one of Gordon Brown's proudest achievements.
Brought it in.
Yeah.
But the state pension is about £221 a week. That's what it is. Now, if you're on that, you're going to lose 300 quid. Now, if the state pension goes up by, 4% she's talking, it's, what's that, 8-9 quid a week it's going to go up? Well, you've lost 300 quid. I mean, you're not really going to be that much better. Of course the state pensions go up. Labour said they keep the triple lot. Don't boast about that.
You're just doing horribly what you out of touch.
Said you'd do.
And you tend to find government's ministers get out of touch after 10, 12 years in power, not after 2 months.
But the government,
10 or 12 weeks, yeah, exactly.
The government announced yesterday there's going to be a vote next week on taking away the winter allowance. This is not an opposition vote called by the Conservative or the Liberal Democrats. It's a government vote. So the government is going to say all Labour MPs have to go into the lobbies and vote for this, or what? We know from a few weeks ago, when there was a rebellion on the 2-child policy, the restriction of benefits only for the first and the second child, that the people who voted against, I think there were 5 or 6 of them.
7.
7 of them. They had the whip taken away from
them. For 6 months. But
are they going to do the same thing next week?
Well, there could be dozens.
Well, I think you'll find a lot may have important business elsewhere, may not be around, so they don't have to vote. No Labour MP will want their name attached to this. They will not want to be seen voting where it can be quoted back at them time after time after time. Now, Labour's got a big anti-poverty inquiry. It may yet come up with some wonderful proposals to improve living standards for the poorest, including pensioners. May yet do that. But this will just be around their neck for the next 5 years unless they U-turn. And that's what they've got to do. Now, maybe they will in the budget on October the 30th. Maybe that's when it will be produced.
So there's an enormous number of people saying it is simply not OK, says Keir, funnily enough, Keir M on X, it's simply not OK to take any money away from pensioners, whether that's a winter fuel payment or hitting someone's pension in the future. Stella says, there are, of course, many pensioners who are financially secure and won't miss the fuel payments, but there are too many pensioners just above the threshold who will have to cut back on their fuel usage this winter.
And interesting that Jeremy Hunt, who was Chancellor, of course, for a long time, as Shadow Chancellor, says this is Labour picking on pensioners because Labour think pensioners vote Tory.
Well, the majority...
I knew they'd make that criticism.
But the majority do.
Criticism could stick.
I think it's the only age demographic where there was a Tory majority.
So Tory pensioners are being punished
But there's a sizable minority who don't, or on their uppers, and voted Labour, and they feel betrayed.
Well,
that's what they do. They feel betrayed. If you're going to means test the winter fuel allowance, does that mean down the line you're going to means test free prescriptions for pensioners? Are you going to means test free bus passes? Are you going to means test other stuff they get? Of course, the state pension, let's not forget, you get that if you've paid 35 years of national insurance contributions. I mean, we'll never forget that people earn that because they pay for it.
And, of course, we've got Prime Minister's questions today. With Rishi Sunak asking the questions. The first
Is he back from California?
Well, I think he is. The first one was rather polite state affair, talking about Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, that's off
I would think today it's going to be different. If you were Rishi Sunak, what's the question you'd be asking?
It'd be all about the winter fuel allowance. No other but all 6. All 6 questions.
Yes, because he knows that it's such a weakness.
Yeah. Well, and you'll see the look of pained horror on the Labour benches.
Well, they won't be able to boo him, and they won't be able to cheer Starmer if he's defending it. That's the problem the Prime Minister has got.
And Rachel Reeves will be sat next to the Prime Minister too, so it's going to be quite an interesting option.
I thought it was very strange. Sir Keir Starmer is in the Rose Garden of number 10 Downing Street, telling everybody there's gloom ahead and those with the broadest shoulders need to take the burden. And pensioners barely surviving say,
pensioners who might not be able to put the heating on this.
Were we the ones with the broadest shoulders?
You can't fill a black hole by chucking poor pensioners in it.
On the fire.
You just can't do that. But you're right. those with the broadest shoulders should pay more. I think there's a lot of people who could pay more, and I'd look at capital gains tax and inheritance tax, loopholes. I'd look at all that. But the glaring contradiction is picking on pensioners in the way they have and doing it initially as standalone. There we are. We've got you had that ridiculous claim by Lucy Powell that if this action hadn't been taken, it could have been a Liz Truss-style run on the pound and economic collapse. I mean, absolutely, total baloney.
I think if it's an issue that so enthusiastically unites you both in your opposition to it...
Must be something wrong.
There's definitely something wrong. So we'll see what happens when we get to Prime Minister's questions. We have a former Chancellor sitting here at the desk, Nadhim Zahawi. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Good to see you. And we're talking to you on the day that the 6th candidate is standing to be leader of the Conservative Party, going to be whittled down by one later today. And Nadhim Zahawi has revealed what he makes of the 5 previous Tory leaders in his brand new book, The Boy from Baghdad.
The Boy from Baghdad. I read it yesterday. It's a great book. It starts from the very beginning of his life, recounting his journey as an Iraqi refugee fleeing Saddam Hussein. And he joins us now. Interesting book. I was expecting it to be the inside story of, Johnson, Truss, Sunak. But it's actually about you and your whole life. I thought, is it going to give us the answers on those tax issues? Is it going to tell us why you backed Boris Johnson and then didn't back him 24 hours later?
Did.
But actually, those things, I thought they were slightly skated over. Yeah. And I read this and I thought to myself, this is a comeback book.
Oh.
This is a book who wants to introduce the public to the real you, the whole story, amazing life story, so that next time you get a better crack of the whip.
So you will know this, Ed. So when Neil Blair, my agent, brilliant, approached me to say, will you do your life story? I was still in Cabinet. I was the Secretary of State for Education then. And I went to the PM and Simon Case, the cab sec, because you have to get permission to write a book. And actually Simon was very generous. He said, look, it is unusual for a serving Cabinet Minister to do this, but your background is so interesting. In this case, I'll let you do it, as long as you don't do the politics. And so I spent 1 year doing everything from, Baghdad, arriving on these shores, life in England, learning English, everything else. And then, of course, I left Cabinet, so publicly and painfully, and I went back to HarperCollins and said, look, if you give me another year, I'll do vaccine, Her Majesty's funeral, which I was privileged to be Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so running the Cabinet Office and operationalising, the Operation London Bridge, as its code name was at the time. And so I spent another year sort of doing all the politics stuff. Boris, Liz, a little bit on Post Office as well.
So I was right. It was originally intended to be a book, which was the launch of Cabinet Minister Zahawi
would have ended up with leader of the party.
Exactly. That's what it was supposed to be.
And it's so tragic.
Now it makes sense.
There you go.
But now it could be the To Mayor of London launch book.
Because is that your aim, Nadhim Zahawi, is because it doesn't look likely you're going to be leader of the party. There are a number of other people jostling for that position right now. But is it that you'd like to be Mayor of London? Because it's interesting. I think yesterday you tweeted a photograph of a homeless person lying on the pavement in one of probably the wealthiest parts of our capital. This is now in Mayfair, just walked past. What is going on at Mayor of London? Yeah. This can't be right.
Very political tweet.
So, by the way, one, I'm out of politics. I'm just a foot soldier now. I'm back in business. I'm chairman of a very large online business that has 4 million customers. We sell them about £1.7 billion.
OK, but that's not why you're on the programme, with all due respect.
I know, absolutely right. But I walk all over London, so I could have been on Victoria Street and I would have had the same thing happen with people. And, by the way, I've known Sadiq. We were both young councillors in Wandsworth, and he's done some really good things in London. And I know the local Westminster councillors, and I just was outraged at the human tragedy of people. Doesn't matter if it was Mayfair. I was just pointing out where it was, actually, as I was walking past.
You were accused of being tone deaf because people responded by saying, oh, my goodness, it's happened in Mayfair.
No, not quite the opposite. I was just trying to point out where it was to get people to hopefully help that individual. Could have been, as I say, Victoria, could have been Stratford-on-Avon. We've got similar problems all over the country.
So you are concerned about homelessness and crime on the streets of London, as any mayoral candidate might be?
Well, stop it.
Are you ruling it out?
No, well, look, I am absolutely ruling out going back into politics.
Are you ruling out being a candidate for Mayor of London at any time in the future?
There is no election for Mayor of London.
That's a political answer.
It's a hypothetical question.
It's a hypothetical question.
You are too good at this. You know that it's a hypothetical. Never say never.
What was your biggest regret from your time in the last 5 years? Yeah.
Not being explicit about my settlement with HMRC. And I take that on the chin, and I own my mistake. I should have been much clearer about the settlement and the fine that I had to pay.
Just to explain to our viewers, what happened was you were removed from office by Rishi Sunak after an investigation by the Standards Advisor, who said that although you were being investigated by HMRC while you were Chancellor and made a payment to HMRC in the millions of pounds, you didn't make that public at the time to the Permanent Secretary in the Treasury and subsequent Permanent Secretaries, and that was the problem.
No, so I did make my declaration that there was an investigation and that I had a settlement. What I didn't is be explicit about the fine. And I think the Nolan principle, where ministers should be held to a much higher standard than everyone else, I fell over on, and I regret that.
The accusation at the time was that this was about offshore bank accounts, and the Chancellor is avoiding tax through an offshore route.
So HMRC found that I was not the beneficiary or the owner of an offshore structure or bank account and everything else, but that the allocation of shares when we founded YouGov should have been more to me than my father, and therefore, when the shares were sold, I should have paid more tax on them because they found that I should have had, 85% of
that was the tax scandal that you were involved in. There was also an expenses scandal that you were involved in, where it emerged that you had claimed expenses to heat your horse's stables.
And
is that one of your regrets?
Well, yes, for not filling the forms correctly, but as you know, the Parliamentary Standards investigators come in, and within 5 minutes they could see that this was an error rather than deliberate.
That was well, I mean, it might have been an error. It was an excruciating one, wasn't it?
It was. All these things are painful, and I now see new members of Parliament having to go through the same, and Ed has been there, where you really have to be ultra careful.
You do, right? Which is
very, very clear.
Let's talk about previous prime ministers, previous leaders, because you, in the book, seem to describe Boris Johnson as the most consequential politician of his generation, which is enormous praise for someone. When you talk about the Nolan principles and having to sort of be better than the best as somebody in office, this is the prime minister who was in charge during Partygate. So a scandal going on under his own roof, in which he was involved while there was a pandemic and a lockdown, and you were trying to get the vaccine out to people.
Yeah, and look, a couple of things on that. One of the themes in the book is that there are no superhumans in politics, and I wanted to just demystify the whole process, because what I'd love to see, and I mentioned earlier, I walk all over London, what's really great is the number of people come up and say thank you for the vaccine, or, we'd like to enter politics. How do we do it? Most people have no clue how to become a member of Parliament in reality, because they've got busy lives, they're doing lots of other things. And actually, in many ways, politics can be inaccessible. Yeah.
But do you think Boris Johnson was the best of the recent Prime Minister?
Well, I'll tell you for why he's the most consequential. If you go back to Thatcher, Blair, Brown, Cameron, May, Johnson, which Prime Ministers had to deal with Brexit and get that done, a global pandemic the size of a third world war against a virus, and then war on our continent? I remember in Cabinet, we were getting a briefing where we were told that Volodymyr Zelensky had, at best, for a fortnight, worst 3 days, and Putin would wipe him and probably kill him. And Boris banged the desk and said, we are doing everything right now I want to leave this room.
Let's ask,
and we mobilise all the support we can for Ukraine, even if it's 3 days and we have to bring his carcass out of Ukraine, but we've got to do it. Okay. And that, for me... And, of course, the vaccine bit, by the way, I can only judge people by how they responded to me working for them. Boris was really good at
we've got to ask you about
the... to deliver the vaccine programme.
Nadine, we've got to ask you about the future.
Of course.
I mean, this is a kind of risky thing. You're the guy who became Boris Johnson's Chancellor and then wrote him a letter telling him to resign 24 hours later. So all the Tory leadership candidates may be desperately worried. If you endorse them today, you may be ditching them tomorrow. So are you going to resist or are you going to back one?
I am going to tell you what happened in the book very briefly.
No, we've only got a few seconds, so we need to know who do you want to lead the
I have not made a decision. But on Boris, the day before, we couldn't form a functioning government. We were losing a minister every half an hour. I went to see him face-to-face as his Chancellor, and he wasn't listening. And by the morning, my letter crossed with his...
Apparently, because we want to know who you want to lead the Tories.
I want someone who can unify the Tories. If we don't unite...
Who is that?
Six
if we do
leadership
not unite,
Tories, they're so desperate he's going to endorse them.
We will be irrelevant if we don't unite. You know this.
Thank you very much.
Your party's been...
They'll all be relieved you've not endorsed them, Nazim.